Everybody have a handout? Braden's going to pass out the handout for today, and we're continuing on with the philosophy of ministry. And so we're kind of, last Thursday, it kind of goes with it, but I talked about spiritual gifts, and this is going to drive me crazy. Hold on. And so there wasn't a handout, and it didn't actually go with this exactly, but we're going to jump right into ministry. So I'm going to start dividing up the different ministries of the church. Again, this is what I believe to be the main ministries of the church, and so we're going to talk about that. Don't ask me why the M's aren't capitalized. I have no idea what happened there, but the main ministries, all right? This is part 3 or 4, I can't even remember. So the main ministries of the church, I have to start by saying outreach, okay? And so this message tonight's just going to be basically what we would call the outreach ministry, okay? And I believe that we all should try to do our best to be a part of it in some way or another, because that's the ministry of the church, to have some kind of impact on society, to be a light to the world, and to obviously spread the gospel and be soul winners. Anybody else need a pen? He's got some pens right there. And so we're talking about outreach. Let's start with Acts chapter 5, verse 42. Acts chapter 5, verse 42. This is the start of the church here, and this is exciting times as they're growing. It says, "And daily in the temple and in every house they ceased not to teach and preach Jesus Christ." Now, I kind of is somewhat jokingly, I've made that kind of our theme verse, right? Iola Baptist Temple. So I'm like, daily in the temple and in every house they cease not to preach. But really, we understand that the temple wasn't a place where they went for like a church service at that time. And the temple was, and we understand that temple is not even there anymore. In the temple, as far as God's house, is among the congregations of his church. And so, but at that time, the temple, all the Jews would still go to the temple, and what they would do is they would often go and preach on the same place Jesus preached, probably Solomon's porch, this big open place where they would all assemble and congregate. Even a lot of Gentiles would go there. There was a certain part where the Gentiles could go. Probably, if the reason that they're at the temple is because they've converted into Judaism. And so a lot of Jews, there were a lot of Jews, and then there were also proselytes, that were hanging around the Jews. And these were the people that they were going to. And so it says daily in the temple and in house to house. Like they were just constantly looking for people to preach the gospel to. They'd either go to this place where all the Jews hung out, and they already had an understanding of the Old Testament, so they could take the Old Testament scriptures and they could preach to them from the Old Testament scriptures and say, hey, this one that the Bible's talking about, Jesus, he's come. And they could try to preach the gospel to them. Or they could just go down to the different houses and go house to house and preaching Jesus Christ. Like, probably, I've heard some people try to say, like, well, that meaning house to house, they were just going house to house, like, of one another, where they're having Bible studies and all that. And I'm saying, the text right here says that they cease not to teach and preach Jesus Christ. Sounds to me like they're teaching the lost people how to be saved. That's my guess. But we certainly know that's what they were doing. And even later on, when they get scattered abroad and they start going to Samaria and other places, what are they doing? They're preaching the gospel. And then the Bible gives us several examples right off the bat, where they find these people who need to get saved. And so we understand that the Bible is full of Old Testament as well, telling us that we need to be soul winners. In fact, obviously, Proverbs where we get that reference to soul winning, he that winneth souls. And so this is going to be a main ministry of the church. I think if a church is missing this, they're really missing out on the main reason that we even exist as a church. Now, again, yes, inside these walls, when we meet together as a church, we should be fulfilling, remember, worship, fellowship, discipleship. We should all be growing, but our function as a church, the reason we need to stay sharpening each other and helping each other to live holy and helping each other to know the Bible so that we can go out to the world and be a light to the world and see people get saved. Evangelism, or I should say outreach, is a key role to the church, trying to get people saved. And then we kind of try to get them inside the doors and get baptized and get added to the church. I guess we don't have to baptize them indoors. We could baptize them outdoors. I've never baptized anybody in a river, so let's work on that. Let's come up with a plan here. So let me show you some different methods of evangelism. Now, way back, I don't know, a couple years ago, whatever, I preached on the methods of evangelism and the motivation of evangelism, and I don't know what all. But different methods of evangelism. And I want to explain this because a church can do a whole lot of things in regards to outreach, even when it comes to evangelism. I'll show you here in a minute. By outreach, I'm including some other reasons that we go out there and visit folks. But a church can do a lot, can be involved in a lot of different things. There's a lot of different ways by which we can get somebody saved. It's not always through door-to-door soul winning, but let me just go over some general methods of evangelism. Now, first off is one that we often downgrade or make fun of, because certainly if this is all somebody does and they call this evangelism, then they're not really evangelizing. Because the Great Commission is to go into the world and preach the gospel, and it's going to involve preaching and actually talking to people about the gospel. But it's lifestyle evangelism. Lifestyle evangelism. That's something I heard a lot at BBC, which has become more like, from my perspective, more liberal type of a church. I mean, it's of an organization. But I remember they were talking about how, man, you really just gotta let people see, your life and let Jesus shine, which is so ironic because oftentimes if they were outside of church, or even if they were in church, really, you couldn't tell if they were a Christian or not by the way that they looked or the way they acted or the regular things that they do. So it's kind of like, well, what's lifestyle? I mean, what are they going to watch and say like, hey, there's something different about that guy? Whenever there's like their method is, hey, we don't want to be different or else we're not going to be able to reach them. It's like, how are you reaching them then? By your lifestyle. All right. But I do want to show a few verses because I don't want to downplay it too much, because what do I mean by lifestyle evangelism? Well, there is a certain sense in which we should live. Look, if somebody's not right with God, and they know that they aren't living right, and people don't recognize them as a Christian or whatever, and they want to go soul winning, guess what I would say? Go soul winning. Probably one of the best ways to kind of get your life right is to get back involved soul winning, and God will just kind of begin to work in your heart. Unless you don't have a problem being hypocritical. But because we're not preaching works. We're not preaching works salvation. And so anybody, regardless of what condition they're in, what state they're in, I'm all for them going and preaching the gospel, okay? But if somebody is, living a wicked life, not recognized as a Christian or whatever, I don't believe they're going to have much fruit, okay? Because they're not in tune with the Spirit. They're not, they're not going to be able to bear this fruit. And let me show you this. Matthew chapter 5, verse 16. Familiar verse. All the verses really tonight are going to be pretty basic verses we're familiar with. Matthew chapter 5, verse 16 says, "Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven." See, that's the key. If people see us being righteous, if they see us living holy and doing good works, it's got to be about like, hey, this is Christ working in me. They got to see the humility there and the humble spirit that's saying, I'm just doing this because, and I'm not any better than anybody else, but I love the Lord and I want to serve Him. And when they see that it's genuine versus the person who, hey, let people see your good works that they might praise you and say how good of a person you are. You know what I mean? We don't want that, but unfortunately, that's what a lot of people do when they're wanting to show off their good works. They're wanting praise. They're wanting recognition. They want to say, hey, look how I deserve to go to heaven and we know that's they're not going to heaven if that's what they're trusting in to go to heaven. And so we're not impressed by that. But Jesus does say, let your light so shine before men. You know, you're not going to hide your light under a bushel. You want them to see you living the Christian lifestyle. You want them to see what a Christian looks like. And by the way, Christianity looks a lot different. Genuine Christianity is probably going to look a lot different than what mainstream Christianity says is the ideal Christian. You know what I mean? So letting men see your good works doesn't mean probably what the TV preacher, you know, and the mega church preacher is telling you is good works. Probably not. All right. But we're going to let our light so shine before men that they'll see it. Some people are offended by the light. Some people don't want the light. They love darkness rather than light, right? But we're going to let our light so shine and let people see our good works so that they might glorify the Father which is in heaven. Look at Hebrews chapter 12. This one a little bit more specific, I guess, and accurate in the way that it describes what I'm talking about. Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 14 says, "Follow peace with all men and holiness, without which no man shall see the Lord, looking diligently lest any man fail of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up trouble you, and thereby many be defiled." Okay, you get this idea here that it's talking about somebody who's not living right. They're not being peaceful with all men. They're not living holy. And what it says, people aren't even going to see the Lord, you know, with that kind of a person. And then it's talking about, you know, this bitterness springing up, and it says it troubles you, and thereby many be defiled. Like, you know, we could be spreading by you know, not living for the Lord, by living in sin. It could be spreading to other people in the church, right? Like a little leaven at the whole lump. And so, you know, before we know it, man, we're causing all kinds of hindrances to the work of God, as opposed to living a life that's holy and godly and full of good works. All right, so lifestyle evangelism has its place. You know, Peter even talks about how the wife that has an unbelieving husband, right? He is not interested in listening to the Bible and trusting what the Bible says, but whenever he sees her life, you know, she wins him over, and he begins to see, you know, what Christianity looks like as she actually does it. So he's more willing to listen to the gospel than as it's preached. And so, you know, there is a sense in which the basic thing that all Christians should be doing is living a godly lifestyle, and thereby we might get some fruit from that. We might be able to preach the gospel to somebody that asks us for the reason for the hope that is in us, and we might be able to give an answer. All right, number 2, media. Okay, radio, television, internet, believe it or not. You know, some people, there was a day people would make fun of that, but you know, there's people in this room who are saved from the works of, you know, something that they saw online or a DVD or something like that. And so there are lots of ways now to get the gospel out. And, you know, I think no excuse. I think every pastor ought to put something out that gives like a gospel presentation. And most churches do have something like that somewhere, unless they're so afraid that that's going to make somebody twofold the child of hell. Because it's not, okay? If you've heard my message on that, you'll understand. But look, people are so afraid to preach the gospel because they think they're going to preach it wrong. And it's like, I don't think you get this. Like, it's not about you. It's just preach Jesus Christ, and people will have the opportunity to receive him or reject him. All right? So anyway, media, different types of media, social media, stuff like that is certainly a good way for evangelism. Personally, I believe as a church, I believe we ought to be involved in that as much as we can to tap into that. Now, we don't have a whole lot of abilities and talents on that right now, I don't think, as far as good quality videos and all that kind of stuff. You know, but we do have a presence, and we do have ability to get the gospel out there and to share some things there that could get the gospel out. All right, how about this? Again, we give it a little bit of a bad name in a church that's a soul-winning church, a true soul-winning, like actually going out there and preaching the gospel. But that is door hangers and gospel tracts. And of course, we take those with us, right? And we give people tracts. And, you know, just today, a guy said, I don't want to talk. He's a nice enough guy. And he said he believed in the Bible and he believed in God and all that kind of stuff, but he just didn't. In fact, he was very much like, I have no clue if I would go to heaven. He was very honest and sincere about that. But when I started asking him further, he's like, I don't really want to talk to you about this through the screen door. Man, I wish I would have said, well, then let me come in and sit down. But I understand where he was going. He's saying like, hey, this is a conversation. It's going to take me some time to sit down with somebody and talk about these things. I'm not going to understand it, and some people feel that way. And so, I left him with, obviously, our invite that has the gospel on the back of it. Said, would you please read ththose verses and just look over that? I said, it's pretty simple. A lot of people are afraid that they're not going to go to heaven because of their works, and actually, because of their sins. And actually, the Bible says that your salvation is not based on that. You are naturally a sinner. We're all sinners, and that you just need to trust Jesus Christ. Anyway, so I was able to leave that in his hands. So we believe having something to distribute, having something to put in their hands, hang on the door if they're not home or whatever, is important. So do we want to have a big debate over whether or not people can get saved by reading a gospel tract? I think that's a non-issue. We're putting the gospel in people's hands. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, if that's all we did as a cop-out for not preaching the gospel, then that's wrong. But if we happen to leave something with somebody and, hey, I don't have a chance to talk to you, but would you read this at some point or go to the website and watch the video or whatever? Look, that's good. That's effective. And we should be trying to do that again. At least. And it's something I've noticed, sometimes I'll see people post something on social media, like just a gospel presentation, or they'll be like, hey, if anybody wants to know how they can get to heaven, please contact me and ask me. You ever see someone do that? Especially if they're in the ministry or missionaries or something like that. I always think, now I could be totally wrong, but I always think, because I know what it feels like, that this person hasn't been able to preach the gospel in a long time, and they're just like, please, somebody, ask me how to get saved. And so they put that on social media or whatever, because it's like, hey, we need to take every opportunity, every advantage we can to be able to get the word out there. So door hangers, gospel tracts, I'm not against them. I'm just against that being all that they do. Okay, and I've shared this before. I don't know if everybody in here has heard this, but I went to this meeting. I was talking to somebody a long time ago about this idea, and this was before we ever did these soul winning events and stuff like that. And I said, I just wish that some of us churches, because everybody was talking. I was going to these preachers meetings, is what it was, and all these preachers were talking about how, I just wish we had some people to go out door knocking and soul winning and stuff. And it's just hard to find anybody to do that. It's hard to find time. And I'm looking at all these preachers thinking like, well, why don't we just go together? Because we're all struggling to find people in a church at that time that, that would go. I'm thankful for the crew that we have now. And now those same people are skeptical. It's like, this is what you wanted all along. But anyway, so I'm talking to him about this, and I'm saying, why don't we get together and invite, we have these preachers meetings, maybe do it along with the preachers meetings and say, hey, on this day, we're all going to get together and we're all going to go out knocking doors. And so this preacher friend, I won't mention his name, but he was like, man, that's a great idea. He's like the only one that's ever showed interest in that, to be honest with me, of all the guys that I've talked to in the circles that I kind of been in for the last 10 years, whatever. So he said, that's a great idea. And so he set something up, next preacher's meeting, or maybe it was just an off day, I can't remember. But he had a great turnout too. I was like, man, this is great. Lots of preachers and people that knew the Bible and all that. And he was organized. He had all these stacks of tracts and what streets they're going to be on, houses. I was like, man, this is amazing. This is going to start something. We're all going to be doing this at each other's churches, and everybody's going to be coming out. And I'll never forget when he began to give the instructions, he said, now, the goal is to knock out X amount of doors and to get all of these tracts distributed. And so he literally said, and I've timed it out, and that would be approximately 1 minute between doors. And if you walk fast, you can do it. So just put one tract on the door, and then you walk to the next door, put another tract on the door, and you go there. And I'm thinking, anybody can do that. The reason for having this meeting is because we need people that can preach the gospel. I was like, this is so bizarre. And so here's what he said. He said, now I'm not telling you that if somebody comes to the door, don't talk to them. Because he's like, definitely talk to them. But I'm just telling you that the goal is to distribute these and hit every door in our town. While I've got all of you guys here, I've got the manpower to do it. We're going to hit every door in the town. And I was just like, my face was probably turning red. I was just like, I can't believe this. And so then he said like, if they do answer the door, give them this tract, and just tell them, hey, our church, because I think it was like before an anniversary service or something like that, and just say, hey, the church down the street is having this anniversary service or whatever, and we'd like you to come. They say, if the opportunity opens up to preach the gospel to them, all the better. I mean, that's really what we want to do, is see people get saved. So if that happens, definitely preach the gospel to them. And I'm like, that's exactly backwards of what we're supposed to be doing. It's supposed to be like, go out there, and your goal is to preach the gospel to somebody. And if they don't want to hear the gospel, invite them to church, or say, hey, will you read this or whatever. And then if they're not home, then leave it on the door. Everything was exactly backwards. And so, like, I don't know, nobody ever did that again. And I mean, I thought it was pretty neat. I mean, I don't know if anyone ever did again. I wasn't invited to anything. But I remember just being like, this is not what we're supposed to be doing. So I'm all for tracts. All right. It gets worse. The gospel wasn't even on the tract. It was just an invite to their service. Now, it did have a website, and if you went to the website and you dug enough, you could find the gospel. But I was really just like, I cannot believe. We sat down and had this conversation about how it was so important for us all to be teaming up and going out there preaching the gospel, But anyway, I'll never forget that. That was actually, believe it or not, a life-changing experience for me, because it actually made me realize how bizarre the method is that's so common out there. And actually I had a platform to be able to say, hey, this is not how we're supposed to be doing it. And ended up, I'm getting way off track here, but I ended up actually being invited to that church to preach later on and share a little bit about, I didn't insult his event, but share a little bit about how, hey, actually we need to be doing way more than just putting gospel tracts on the door. We need to be preaching the gospel. And he did have some guys on staff that went out and preached the gospel. But anyway, I just want to share that with you. It's so bizarre, but you'd be surprised how many churches, that's the extent of that's the most soul winning effort they'll do, is just go put door hangers on the door. Let me go to the next one, D. Obviously public preaching. Okay. So some people would say street preaching. When I think of street preaching, I think of these, skinheads looking guys with the signs, Jesus saves, and a bullhorn, and they're all preaching lordship salvation, or just flat out work salvation. And but I have seen some guys preach the right gospel on the door. I mean, not on the door, on the streets. Sorry. I'll just put that there. And in fact, one time I heard these ladies, they were preaching in Spanish, and they were on the corners, like there was like a busy four-way intersection, and these guys, they were strategically placed on all four corners, and these ladies were the ones actually preaching the gospel through the bullhorn, and when you stopped, just like the people that try to sell you the pixie sticks and make tons of money for the church. You have to ask Brother Justin about what they're really doing. Don't ever give them money for pixie sticks. Am I right? But they would hit the door. As soon as you hit that red light, they'd hit the door, and they'd come, and you think, oh no, what are these guys doing? But they're handing you gospel tracts, and I read it, and they were the right gospel, And so I couldn't speak Spanish well enough to know what the ladies were saying, but the tract was the right gospel. So. There are people that do public preaching like that, but, when I think of public preaching, I just think of, again, daily in the temple, right? They just went to the temple and they would just find people and they'd preach to them. We've seen missionary endeavors where in places where they're not allowed to knock on the doors and give the gospel like we do here. So they would just go to busy places, malls or whatever, where a lot of people assemble, subways or whatever, and just approach people and start talking. That's public preaching. I don't mean you have to get up on a soapbox and shout real loud, but hey, you could do that too, right? I mean, that's certainly a method of evangelism. Now here's an interesting one, but again, I actually believe it's effective nowadays in our society, the way people watch YouTube and stuff like that, the TED Talks. Do you ever watch any TED Talks? There's an opportunity, there's a platform for people who are more kind of like the philosophers and the intelligent thinkers, and they want to break things down. we tend to think all those people are like reprobates and they're not going to listen to the gospel, but that's not true. A lot of people that were saved were like these hardcore atheists who had all these reasons why they didn't believe in God, and then something happened that changed their mind on that. And so let me talk about here's what I mean by this public speaking or these debates. Now, maybe this would also include, by the way, if I had a special service and I said, hey, we're just going to have this special service, friend day or whatever. So go out and invite this is what a lot of churches try to do every Sunday. But I think there's a place for it, but it's not the regular function of the church, but there's a place for that. Say, hey, this special service, maybe Easter service is coming up, right? And so if we did the special push to get people in the public to come to something that we're doing or whatever, hey, come listen to this Easter sermon or whatever, then, and we were able to get a lot of people who were lost in the church, that this would kind of be a similar idea. But there's also schools, like public schools, like colleges and stuff like that, where people can go. And if you got the right, connections or whatever, you can get in there and actually be allowed to preach do a class or something like that, where you're actually able to present the gospel. Or what some guys would do, and Kent Hovind was actually great at this, he would actually do a creation debate, and he'd just fill up this classroom. You got this atheist who can't wait to debate his side, and you got Kent Hovind who would debate his side, and then they would record it and put it on a DVD, and at the end he'd give a gospel presentation, or sometimes even on the platform. I remember watching. I don't know what you think about Ken Ham. I'm a little worried that he preaches the wrong gospel. He preaches lordship salvation. But I know this. I watched a debate that he had with Bill Nye the Science Guy. Anybody remember that when it was publicized? See, everybody's heard about it. And a lot of people watched it. And when I watched it, you know what I thought? Well, I'll tell you what the second thing I thought. The first thing I thought was that it was actually he was smart. He knew what he was doing. Okay, but the second thing I thought was he totally lost that debate. Okay, I thought. He didn't present a whole bunch of really great arguments or anything like that. But see, the very first thing I thought whenever I listened to his answers and everything he was given, I was like, he's not there for a debate. Now, he set it up and he built it as a debate, and all these people paid, I don't know if they paid tickets, surely not. Anyway, don't charge people to hear the gospel. But anyway, I don't think it was. I think it was free. And they might have had to get some kind of ticket to make sure they had a seat, but it was huge. It was televised. All these people watched it. And every time the guy would give an answer, it seemed like Ken Ham's answers were kind of like, well, I don't know exactly about all that kind of stuff, but here's what I know is that the Bible says, and he'd just be preaching using these verses and preaching Jesus and stuff. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure this is what he's doing. Like if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But I think it was kind of genius because he had a huge audience, and he's like, you know what? I'm just going to preach Jesus. I'm just going to bring. And so everyone's like, oh, he totally lost that debate. Well, who cares? He was preaching the gospel, and the gospel is the power of God into salvation. And so I wouldn't be surprised if people got saved through listening to that. Very possible. But anyway, look at Acts chapter 6. Acts chapter 6. Starting verse 8. And Stephen, full of faith and power, did great wonders and miracles among the people. Then there arose certain of the synagogue, which is called the synagogue of the Libertines, and the Cyrenians, and Alexandrians, and of them of Cilicia and Asia, disputing with Stephen. And they were not able to resist the wisdom and the spirit by which he spake. Okay, so all these guys were trying to argue with him, and he was able to give an answer, and he was able to conduct himself in a manner that was able to get the gospel out there. And we know he ends up getting stoned to death. we know that he ends up not being received well by everybody. But we know at least one person who was affected by his preaching. That's the Apostle Paul, right? Because he was standing right there as he was getting stoned. He was listening to all of this. And I have no doubt 2 chapters later, whenever Paul gets a message from from Jesus himself saying, hey, why kickest thou against the pricks? I have no doubt that how the Holy Spirit was pricking his heart is through the preaching of Stephen. I'm pretty certain about that. But regardless, he had an opportunity and a platform there as he was debating, and the people could not debate him. Verse 17, obviously, if you're speaking the truth from the Bible by the Holy Spirit, people aren't going to be able to argue against it. Acts chapter 17, verse 18. Now, obviously, there's debates that's wrong. And the Bible speaks of debates as being a bad thing. But that's somebody who is just arguing, just because they want to argue and they want to prove their point and they're arguing about stupid stuff, right? That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about somebody who's actually arguing for the Scripture and arguing against people who, and actually their argument is actually for the audience. Right? Who cares about the Pharisees? And this is when you look at Jesus and the apostles, when they preached, they weren't concerned about those people who were mockers and scoffers and didn't care what they had to say. They were singling in those people who had listening ears, who were really like, oh, what this guy's saying makes sense. And so that's who these debates are really for. If you're just arguing with somebody just to prove a point or look good, then that's wrong. There's nothing spiritual about that. All right, 17, starting verse 18. Then certain philosophers of the Epicureans and the Stoics encountered him, and some said, what will this babbler say? Others some, he seemeth to be a setter forth of strange gods, because he preached unto them Jesus and the resurrection. And they took him and brought him unto Areopagus, saying, may we know what this new doctrine whereof thou speakest is? For thou bringest certain strange things to our ears. We would know, therefore, what these things mean. Anyway, so this is where they sit down in this classroom setting almost, or an Areopagus, where the scholars go, it's kind of like where the TED Talks are being held, right? And they allow him to take opportunity to present, the gospel. And again, some don't like it. And then some say, hey, I'll hear you again of the matter. And then some people believe. And so this is a platform. We need to take advantage of all of these platforms. Number 2 there says, they all have their place. I believe all these different methods have their place. We can incorporate them into our ministries and use them from time to time. And some of them can be combined together. Obviously, the door hanger, or the giving out of the gospel tracts could be combined with the public preaching and all that kind of stuff. But our goal in all these methods is always going to be personal evangelism. Okay, personal evangelism. Now, that could mean different things to different people, but by personal, I just mean simply getting to have a connection, like a one-on-one conversation with somebody. Or I say one-on-one, obviously you can talk to a group of people. I remember just recently, Brother Austin, out when we were in Iola knocking doors, we were across from Allen County Community College, knocking, some apartments over there. And I remember walking by, he and one of the Ames brothers, I can't remember what his name was, they were standing there, and they had this group, like 4 guys, just standing there, just college guys, just standing there listening to him as he preached the gospel. And I was like, man, that's awesome. So, and I think only one guy got saved, one that he was willing to count as I believe that person got saved. But he gave the gospel to all these people. But even in a group setting, like I said, you can always tell, even if I'm preaching to 50 people in a classroom setting or something like that, I can probably single out the people that are actually following me and wanting to hear what I have to say. And so those are the people that you're wanting to preach the gospel to. It's personal evangelism. Also, this is called confrontational soul winning. Confrontational, of course, gets a bad name. You think it means argumentative and being mean and ugly and stuff like that. That's not what we mean. Confrontation just means you're confronting them with the fact that, they might not go to heaven if they die, right? How many times do people get offended at the door? Oh, we ask them a simple question. We're so nice. We're so super easy. People think, oh, you're preaching the gospel. You're like, oh, you're a sinner, and if you don't turn, you're going to burn, and we're doing all this stuff. No, actually, literally, we're saying, do you know for sure if you died, you'd go to heaven? And they're just like, well, I just don't like talking about those things, right? Right? But it's still confrontation. So this is, it still puts that pressure in them because they're like, I don't really know if I'm going to heaven. And so they need to have that confrontation. Otherwise we're probably wasting our time. But as a church, I believe the most effective method and the one that is best for an organized church effort is door-to-door soul winning. And so let me explain that. So obviously, I believe it's the most effective in that you literally are knocking on every door. Now we know, let's say half the doors, nobody's home. We're still leaving something on the door, and eventually we're going to knock those doors. You will run into people who you're going to talk to, who you're going to be able to give the gospel to. I believe it's the most effective way to do that. Not only that, as I said in that sentence right there, I believe it's also the best for an organized effort from the church, okay? Now, I could get up here and preach, hey, the main thing is that we win souls. So just go out there and live for the Lord and live a holy life and lifestyle evangelism, blah, blah, blah. That's probably not really helping you because you know that you're supposed to be living a holy life. You know you're supposed to be preaching the gospel to people, okay? But I'm not really giving you the opportunity to do it, and I'm not teaching you how to do it. I'm just saying, hey, you need to go do it. Okay, and so I could go street preaching. Might be able to get a handful of people to go out there and go street preaching, but likely it's not going to be very effective, and not very many people are going to get out and do that. But teaming up, going 2 by 2, which is what Jesus incidentally did, right? Sent out the disciples 2 by 2. Later on, he sent the 70 out 2 by 2. Even Peter and John went to the temple, right? And they ended up getting somebody saved. I mean, there's a lot of examples where there was 2 people going together. But not only that, when we go out, what do? We get a speaker and a silent partner. And if both people they like preaching the gospel, then they take turns. This person gets to talk. Next time they switch up, and one's a silent partner, and the other guy gets to talk. And this is the perfect model. And everybody in here probably knows that. But I'm just saying, think about why we do it. It's the perfect model. To be able to, hey, everybody gets a chance, gets an opportunity. You can mix up soul winning partners every once in a while, which is a great opportunity to hear different approaches, all obviously preaching the same gospel, but maybe some people use slightly different illustrations or take them to a different verse. I didn't think about that verse. They're going to hear, even if as a silent partner, someone who's not really comfortable speaking, they're still learning a bunch and they're still being involved in a great soul winning effort. They're hearing the gospel over and over. A lot of times people say, hey, I want to do this, and they go as a silent partner. There's lots and lots of stories out there where people get saved as a silent partner out soul winning because they're listening to the gospel, and they're just, as that person prays, they're like, wow, I didn't even think about that. And they hear the gospel presented in simple terms, and sometimes they get saved. It's a great way to do it, and that's why I think that needs to be as our church, our main focus as the type of evangelism. We don't want to get caught up in all these other things that aren't as effective or as helpful as a church. We can do them, and I think that there's a place for them and that they're good if we have opportunity to. I think social media we have a great advantage there if we can get into that. But our main focus, I believe, needs to be the door-to-door soul winning and trying to get as many people in the church involved in that as we can. And of course, everybody in here knows that, but this is just me going over my philosophy of ministry. So as a church, we have regular soul winning times throughout the week. We also have quarterly soul winning times where we try to join up with other churches if possible. We need to see about teaming up with Amazing Grace Baptist Church again. That was great. That was a great time and reach some of the Spanish-speaking community. But unfortunately, a lot of churches don't want to get involved. That's just the way that it is. But we want to offer the opportunity for that. And obviously, other people, friends that we have that don't go to this church, but they like going soul winning. They come out and they join us, and it's a great time to just fellowship and go to different places. And then we engage in other evangelistic endeavors as we have opportunity. I really want to look into, in the next couple of years, taking a missions trip somewhere to a foreign field, I'm thinking probably like somewhere in Africa, something like that. I think it would be a great opportunity for our church and for those who are soul winners. Brother Schmucky, we've gone out there to the truck stop ministry that he's got there. A great opportunity. Seen a lot of souls saved. He also is supposed to keep me posted. I never put a date down or anything, but there's a fair that his church goes to every year. I think they just started it last year, but there's a fair that allows them to get a booth. And in that booth, they've got this ministry where they can print Bibles like the John and Romans, and they can print them, right there from the church, and then they box them up and send them out. We support a missionary that's part of that work. And anyway, so he was going to keep me posted whenever he does this, but he's like, all these people that walk by, a lot of them will stop and take a Bible, or what they do is they offer them the opportunity to customize their own Bible and make their own Bible, and then they take it away with them. And then, of course, anybody that they get into their booth, they give them the gospel. I just think that's a neat opportunity. It's something different, something we might like to see how that goes and be able to take part in something like that would be neat. Lots of different ways. But when it comes to outreach ministry, obviously evangelism is the key thing that we're talking about, but also follow-ups. Okay, Acts 14, verse 21. I think it's really important that we go back and follow up on people after they get saved. We've not been doing a great job on that. I've got some different excuses I could give, but that wouldn't help anybody. Acts chapter 14, let's start with verse 21. And when they had preached the gospel to that city and had taught many, they returned again to Lystra and to Iconium and Antioch, confirming the souls of the disciples and exhorting them to continue in the faith, and that we must, through much tribulation, enter into the kingdom of God. And so they went back, and basically what they're doing is following up on the believers, and they're confirming them, and they're talking to them and trying to help them to live for the Lord and be disciples, and eventually they ordain elders over the groups, and they become churches. But it's very important that we go back and give them the opportunity to come, be discipled, come, get baptized. I mean, these are part of the Great Commission as well. And so we really need to try to follow up. I know that there's a thought out there that's like, well, look, our doors are open, and they've got the information, they know where to come, and so the discipleship's on them. But let's be real. I mean, people don't just naturally, even if they're saved, they don't just naturally oh man, I got to start going to church every time the door's open. I got to read my Bible every day, whatever. No, they're going to go back, and they're still in the world. They're still in this fleshly body. They still have the lust of the flesh. They need somebody to help them to get to church and to help show them, these things. And they just don't naturally, know what the next step is to take. Some do, that's great. Some end up coming to church and following up. But most need somebody to go back and visit them a second time. So what we try to do is we record the information for anyone who gets saved. Now, if you're like me, and that's for whatever reason, that's the simplest thing in the world to do after someone gets saved is just get their information, come back and write it in the book. But I'm terrible at it, okay? What I did start doing, though, is texting it to my wife. That way I know that the information is recorded, and then we can come back and we can get it written down. And then the plan is to take that information, and by the way, we're writing the names up on the board now and trying to keep track of the names so we can pray for them. And then we try to send them a packet, okay? The original plan was within that first week after they get saved, we send them a packet. And that packet has some information about the church. It has it has a gospel information in case, they hear that again, or maybe they want to give it to a friend, to share it with a friend. But sometimes you find out that they just still didn't completely get it, and so we want to provide that for them again. We give them information on baptism, information on why to join the church, information about our church, and then basically there's a letter that just explains it all and says, hey, we're so glad that you chose to follow the Lord, or chose to receive Christ. I can't remember how the letter writes, but and then we invite them to come, and we offer them if they'll come. Well, we've never given one out yet, but if they come, we'll give them a Bible to take with them. I shouldn't say that. I bet we've given out a couple, but Of course, we'll give them out at their house and at their door anyway after they get saved. But we try to get them back in. We'll give them a nicer Bible. And the goal is to get them here, talk to them about baptism, talk to them about coming to services and getting plugged in. That's the goal. Okay, so this is part of outreach ministry as well, is this ministry of follow-up, which I've got to, we get very focused on the event, on the door knocking part, which we need to. We can't leave that undone. But we also have got to figure out a way to get some of these visited. If you don't think that your person that you got saved, that you led to the Lord, is getting this follow-up information and no one's knocking on the door, it doesn't hurt to just go back yourself. You know where the door is and you know who they are, or get their phone number. After they get saved, try to exchange numbers and maybe give them a call Saturday. Say, hey, any chance you're going to come to church on Sunday? And just work them for a little while. Don't overdo it. Don't get a restraining order put on you or something like that. But we want to follow up. We really want to show these people that we care about them and that give them opportunity to grow. All right, so those blanks there, number 2, are salvation, baptism, and information about the church. And then, the goal is that the second week, we'll go up and do a follow-up and see if they got that information, got that packet. A lot of them don't for whatever reason. But then we give the opportunity to, even since they didn't get to read it, we get the opportunity to give it to them verbally and just tell them, a lot of times, sometimes you go and they won't even be there. You'll talk to somebody else. We've gotten other people saved by doing follow-up, and so anyway, it's a great opportunity. We need to continue to work on that and maybe get some people trained and experienced in doing that. That would help. All right. And then we also will record certain houses that we just feel like they need a follow-up. Maybe they didn't have time to talk, or they said, hey, I want to give it a little more thought, think about it for a while, or they had a bunch of questions. Of course, Acts 24, 25, let's go ahead and go there. Acts 24, 25. And as he reasoned of righteousness, temperance, and judgment to come, Felix trembled and answered, Go thy way for this time. When I have a more convenient season, I will call for thee. All right, so and then there's other times where we will hear you again of this matter. But sometimes, obviously there are times where people are just making excuses and they're saying, you know what, I need to think about that a little bit more. Or they'll say, I don't really have time. Maybe if you come back on the weekend, and then you come back and they never answer the door because they're like, oh, they really came. It happens. We understand that. But it's not always going to be the case. And so we want to give them a chance. If they say, hey, we want you to come back, or we just don't have time right now, we want to try to make opportunities. Maybe you can write that down and get that information in so that we can make that follow-up. All right, Luke chapter 14. And I'll say this too, I don't ever want to give somebody an excuse to not go soul winning. We should all try to go soul winning, whenever we can. And that's why we try to provide a lot of opportunities to do that. But to be honest, there are people who thrive better at the soul winning, but maybe wouldn't be as good as at the follow-up. It's just the way some people are. Some people would be much better going and being just making this hospitable, just a polite visit, following up. Hey, did you get that packet? And all. And for whatever reason, there are some people that feel more comfortable doing that than making the cold, door-to-door soul winning. And so, it could be that somebody would be really good for that ministry and actually be able to kind of be used in a greater way at that. Luke chapter 14, look at verse 18. And they all with one consent began to make excuses. The first said unto him, I have bought a piece of ground, and I must need go and see it. I pray thee have me excused. And another said, I have bought 5 yokes of oxen, and I go to prove them. I pray thee have me excused. And another said, I have married a wife, and there I cannot come. So the servant came and showed to his lord these things. Then the master of the house, being angry, said to his servant, Go out quickly into the streets and the lanes of the city, and bring in hither the poor and the maimed and the halt and the blind. Look, there's a lot of people that are just going to give excuses because for whatever reason they're just not comfortable. They don't want to be confronted with the fact of the gospel, and they don't want to take that time to talk to you. All right, finally, just real quickly, I just basically just say a couple things about them, but what we would call visitation, or maybe just what we call calls. I don't mean phone calls, although I suppose there's a place for that too. Somebody can make phone calls, but these include hospital visits, what we call shut-in visits, which mean basically somebody who maybe they're injured and they just can't get out, or maybe they're older and they just are for some reason not able to leave the house. I suppose even sick, although we don't want to just go catch some sickness from them. But if someone's sick for some time, they're going to be out for a while. It's good to just be able to visit these folks. Now, and then the third is this: absentee visits. So somebody who just hasn't come in a long time, it's good to make visits. Now, obviously, this is where me being the pastor at two different locations, this is where this really starts to kind of show up, okay? Because it's easier for me in Iola if somebody is in the hospital in Allen County, hospital or something like that, to jump over there. It's easy for me to go to the nursing homes and visit on somebody, or someone hadn't been there for a while to go and visit. To some degree, it's easier in Iola, but I'm not going to have a whole lot of opportunities to do that here, because when I'm here, we're going soul winning or we're having church. So in order to get to a point where we can kind of really key in on this, we'll probably have to utilize other people, because I'm probably not always going to be hardly going to be available to do these things. But when somebody's sick and in the hospital, now there are times since I'm the pastor, if I have the time, I'll drive from Iola up here to Kansas City or out to Wichita to visit somebody if they're having a surgery or something like that, just to show them that I'm supporting them, and I genuinely am concerned and want to see them come through it and all that kind of stuff. If I have the opportunity to do that, I'll do that a lot of times. So by the way, let me know if you're going to the hospital, or somebody in your family's going to the hospital, if you could if you use that support, and I'll come have prayer with you and just hang out a little bit. I need to make more of these absentee visits. I think that would help people who kind of start getting away. We all know, probably everybody in here knows, if you miss, except for my family, because they're never allowed to miss any church. But if you miss a service or two, doesn't it just get easier to just miss the next one and miss the next one and miss the next one? And there's not much you can do about that. That person, just something needs to happen that makes that person decide to start coming again. Well, sometimes a visit is what it takes, And nowadays, it's a little harder to make visits like that, because people aren't comfortable with you just popping in on them. I haven't had time to clean and all this kind of stuff, and so they might not invite you in or whatever. But there are ways to do it, and I think it would be good to just pop into people every once in a while. That's something that this work here, as long as I'm the pastor, it's going to pastor at both locations. It's going to suffer a little bit until we can get somebody who can take that on. And Lord willing, we will one day have a deacon or assistant pastor, or somebody who can fulfill these roles on a more full-time basis. That would be a huge blessing. And then, of course, Lord willing, one day we'll turn it over to somebody, be a completely independent work, and there'll be a pastor in charge of it. So next week, Lord willing, we'll start these others, and for the following weeks, however many it takes, here are some other ministries. We're talking about the main ministries, and we just started focusing on outreach ministry, because I believe that's the first. And again, it kind of has to do with why we do so much of what we do, but outreach has to do with outside these walls. Okay, so now we're going to focus on inside these walls. Hospitality, security, maintenance, I put all those together. Seems kind of like in the same genre of things to do here at the church. Hospitality meaning like greeting people and helping people to get maybe a card filled out, visitor card, or just different things like that. It'd be some churches that have ushers, and stuff. All be hospitality. Music ministry, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about media, being sound ministry, the video, social media, all those kinds of things. Of course, preaching and teaching ministry. And then I'll call it family ministry, but that would include children's ministries and teen ministries. We obviously don't really do that here, but look, there are families who need some special preaching and some special maybe activities or stuff like that, to kind of help with just life, that I can't necessarily, it doesn't apply to everybody in the church. And children and teens do see things a little bit different than adults do, right? So there are like some needs that they have that it would be good to provide some kind of godly outlet for those things. So even though we don't have a full-fledged like youth group or children's program or something like that, like we do want to be still in remembrance that there are things that will help the teens. Like sometimes we still go to camp and we still do things. Even the fathers, the men's outing, that obviously we're going to want to incorporate the children in that, and we have some things for the ladies coming up, where the mother and daughter type things. And anyway, we want to just remember the families, children, teens, babies, all that kind of stuff. And so we'll talk about these things in the coming lessons. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for this church and the ministries that you've called us to, the ministry you've given us opportunity to perform. I pray, Lord, that you'll help us do it to the best of our ability. Help us show our let our light shine and show our works, that you might be glorified. And I pray that you'll help us to stay on track in this church as far as what the most important things are in the main ministries, and not get off track too much following the things that aren't important. But I pray, Lord, that you would be glorified in what we do, and that we would bear much fruit for your honor and glory. We would see souls get saved and allow them to be discipled and added to the church, Lord. I pray you continue to send laborers and help us accomplish these things. In Jesus' name, amen.